Hidden within the lesser-known corners of biblical history is a tale the Church worked hard to erase. While many recognize Enoch as the faithful man who walked alongside God, there is another Enoch, the son of Cain, the world's first murderer. This overlooked descendant became the builder of humanity's very first city, experienced terrifying visions from the heavens, and authored a book so controversial that early church leaders completely banned it. In his writings, he exposed forbidden truths about fallen angels who had relations with humans, giving rise to a monstrous race of giants that brought ruin to the world. For ages, his book was thought to be lost forever until hidden copies were uncovered by archaeologists in distant caves. What was it about this ancient manuscript that terrified religious authorities so much? Today, we are breaking the silence to reveal the unsettling truths hidden within the banned writings of Enoch. This story begins with blood spilled on the earth and a man fleeing from God. Cain had just committed an act that would change the world forever. He murdered his own brother, Abel. Genesis 4:8 captures this haunting moment. And Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and while they were in the field, Cain attacked Abel, his brother, and killed him. This was not just any act of violence. This marked the first time in history that one human being ended the life of another. Never before had the earth witnessed such a brutal act between brothers, between family members who were meant to love and protect one another. The fields where Abel once peacefully tended his flocks were now tainted with his blood. The ground that had received Abel's offerings to God now drank in something far more tragic, the life of an innocent soul. Cain stood over his brother's lifeless body, likely stunned by what he had done. His hands were stained with blood, his heart overwhelmed with a mix of rage, fear, and perhaps the very first shadow of regret any human had ever known. When God came seeking Abel, Cain tried to conceal his crime. But nothing is hidden from God. The conversation that followed, found in Genesis 4:9-10, exposes Cain's inner thoughts. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain answered, "I don't know. Am I supposed to watch over my brother?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." Even the earth itself was demanding justice. Abel's blood called out to God, crying for answers to this horrific act. God didn't ask because he lacked knowledge of Abel's whereabouts. God sees and knows all things. He was offering Cain a chance to admit his wrongdoing, to take responsibility, and perhaps express remorse. But Cain's reply revealed how hardened his heart had become. "Am I supposed to watch over my brother?" he retorted, showing no care for Abel's life, no sign of guilt for his actions. He stood defiant, even as God questioned him directly. God's judgment came swiftly and with certainty. As written in Genesis 4:11-12, the punishment perfectly fit the crime. "Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the soil, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a restless wanderer upon the earth." Cain, once a farmer, would never again succeed in growing crops. The very land he had depended on would reject him. The earth, which had absorbed his brother's innocent blood, would no longer respond to his labor. This curse was fittingly tailored to his actions. Cain had committed murder in a field, on land meant to nurture life and provide sustenance. Now that same earth would become his adversary. Every seed he tried to plant would fail. Each attempt to cultivate the ground would meet with dry and fruitless soil. He was condemned to roam endlessly, unable to settle, destined to live as a drifter without a home or peace. But then something unexpected occurred. Facing this harsh reality, Cain cried out to God in Genesis 4:13-14, "My punishment is more than I can endure. You have driven me today from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." For the first time since committing his crime, Cain showed real emotion. He was filled with fear. He understood that in a world without laws or protection, where justice was swift and personal, someone would certainly seek revenge for what he had done to Abel. This was the first moment Cain seemed to grasp the true consequences of his actions. His punishment wasn't only about what God had decreed, it was about the threat of human retaliation. Abel had been loved. Others would want to see justice done for his murder. And in a time with no formal courts or judges, justice often meant violence, delivered by one's own hands. Yet God's response revealed something remarkable about divine mercy, even amid judgment. Genesis 4:15 records, "The Lord said to him, 'If anyone kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold.' Then God placed a mark on Cain to prevent anyone from harming him. This mark wasn't given to disgrace him, but to protect him. It served as a warning. Whoever harmed this man would suffer God's wrath." What exactly was this mark? The Bible doesn't describe its appearance. Some believe it may have been a scar. Others suggest it was a visible alteration, perhaps something on his forehead. Whatever its form, it was unmistakable. Everyone who encountered Cain knew he was under divine protection. It was a clear sign saying, "God has already passed judgment on this man. Leave him alone." With this mark of protection upon him, Cain began his life of exile. Genesis 4:16 describes his departure. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The name Nod means wandering, and this desolate region became Cain's new home. He was leaving behind everything familiar, his family, his land, and his former life. He was also leaving behind the presence of God, burdened with the weight of his brother's blood and the mark that set him apart. The journey to Nod must have been harsh and lonely. Cain ventured into unknown lands, carrying whatever provisions he could manage, not knowing how long he would be on the move. With each step, he traveled farther from the home of his youth, farther from his parents, Adam and Eve, and farther from the places where his life had once felt secure. The mark on his body protected him from the hands of others, but it couldn't shield him from isolation, sorrow, or the crushing memory of what he had done. The land of Nod was wild and untouched. There were no established paths, no villages, no signs of civilization. Cain had to search for water, hunt animals for food, and build shelter from whatever nature provided. This was existence at its rawest. Each day demanded effort simply to survive, to find enough to eat and drink to endure until tomorrow. But even in this wilderness, Cain was not entirely alone. Genesis 4:17 reveals a surprising detail. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, Cain had a wife. Where had she come from? While the Bible doesn't explain every detail, it's clear that Adam and Eve had more children beyond Cain and Abel. Genesis 5:4 states that Adam lived for 800 years after fathering Seth and had other sons and daughters. These early generations stretched over long spans of time and included many people. Though the Bible focuses on Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's family continued to grow. Their other children had married among themselves and started new families. By the time Cain killed Abel, there were already other people populating the earth. Cain found a woman from among these descendants, someone who chose to share in his exile and build a new beginning with him. She left behind her home and family to accompany Cain to the land of Nod. Together, they started over, forging something new out of Cain's shattered past. Perhaps she saw something in Cain that others didn't, or perhaps she, too, was searching for a fresh start. The child born to them wasn't just any son. This was Enoch, Cain's firstborn. The name Enoch carries the meaning of dedication, or initiation. Cain might have chosen this name to symbolize his desire to dedicate his son to a new chapter, a clean slate in this unfamiliar land. Or perhaps he hoped that this child would be part of something larger, something neither of them could fully understand. Maybe, deep down, Cain wished this child could somehow redeem what had been lost through his terrible mistake. The birth of Enoch became a significant moment in Cain's life. For the first time since the tragedy with Abel, Cain had a reason to live beyond mere survival. He now had a son, someone who would carry on his name and whatever legacy he could build. This child represented a glimmer of hope, a possibility for a different future, and perhaps even a path to redemption. As Cain cradled his newborn in his arms, he must have been overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. There was happiness at becoming a father, anxiety about the harsh world his child would face, and a fragile hope that this boy might enjoy a life far better than his own. The mark placed upon Cain to shield him from vengeance would also extend its protection to his family. His son would grow up without the fear of retribution for his father's sin. But Cain's story didn't end with the birth of his son. The same verse that mentions Enoch's arrival also shares something remarkable. He built a city and named it after his son, Enoch. Consider how astonishing this is. Cain, once doomed to roam the earth, condemned as a wanderer, chose to build the first city known to humanity, and he named it in honor of his son. This decision stood in clear defiance of the judgment God had spoken over him. God had said Cain would be a restless fugitive, never settled. Yet Cain made a choice to stop his wandering. He gathered people and established a permanent community. His actions declared, "I may not succeed in farming, but I can still create something enduring. I can build a home where my son and his descendants can thrive beyond my mistakes." Establishing a city in those ancient days was no easy feat. Cain needed to choose a strategic location, one with reliable water sources, natural defenses, and materials for construction. He had to persuade others to join him in this ambitious endeavor. He would have needed to organize labor, assign responsibilities, and manage the efforts of many working together toward a shared vision. This wasn't merely a collection of scattered shelters. It was a true city. Walls, gates, streets, and buildings took shape. In doing this, Cain left his own mark on history, one entirely different from the mark God had placed upon him. God's mark was meant for protection and as a reminder of judgment. Cain's city, however, symbolized ambition and legacy. He was creating something entirely new for humanity. Until then, people had lived in tents, moved with their animals, and led simple, nomadic lives close to nature. These early people followed the rhythm of the seasons, moving on when the grass was gone, owning little, and living simply. But Cain was doing something entirely different. He was building something fixed, something that would remain in place. He was laying the foundation for what would eventually become human civilization. He built walls to protect from threats outside. He added gates to manage who entered and who left. Streets were laid out to direct the flow of people and trade. Constructing the city was not quick. It took years of hard labor. Stones had to be cut and shaped by hand. Walls had to be raised from the ground up. Foundations had to be carefully placed. Cain led this effort, organizing laborers into teams, assigning duties, and overseeing the enormous task. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before in all of human history. Young Enoch grew up surrounded by this incredible work. Imagine being the very first child raised within a city's walls, while elsewhere children were learning to herd sheep and plant crops under open skies. Enoch's lessons were about walls and gates, about living closely with others, about navigating the complexities of urban life. He experienced things no other child before him had known. The city that bore his name became his playground, his classroom, and his future all at once. He walked down streets his father had mapped out, played in courtyards his father had envisioned, and learned from the people his father had gathered there. Every part of his daily life was a living reminder that this entire place existed because of his father's determination and vision. But it wasn't just the buildings and streets that shaped Enoch's early years. It was also the people who chose to live there. Cain City attracted individuals searching for change, for something different from the old ways. People who didn't fit into the traditional patterns of life. Some were drawn to the promise of a fresh beginning, like Cain himself. Others came because they were inventors and creators, eager to explore new ideas and new ways of living. Still others arrived out of curiosity, simply wanting to witness this strange new kind of settlement. The city became a center for innovation and experimentation. Genesis 4:20-22 gives us insight into Enoch's relatives and what they accomplished. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He became the ancestor of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He became the forefather of all who played the harp and flute. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain, who became the first craftsman skilled in working with bronze and iron. These people weren't just distant relations of Enoch. They lived alongside him within the city. They were actively shaping its growth and progress with their skills and ideas. Jabal was transforming how people lived with and managed animals, developing new methods to care for herds and flocks, even within the boundaries of a city. Jubal was bringing music into the world, creating instruments that produced sounds no one had heard before. Tubal-Cain was mastering the art of working with metal, forging tools and weapons far superior to anything crafted from stone or wood. Music, metalwork, animal care, and urban design, all these advancements were being pioneered within Cain's family line. Enoch grew up in the midst of the world's first musicians, first metalworkers, and first urban planners. His city evolved into a center for human creativity and discovery. People were crafting tools from metal, composing music, and constructing remarkable buildings. The sound of hammers striking metal echoed through the streets as Tubal-Cain and his apprentices worked tirelessly. Melodies floated through the air as Jubal taught others how to play his newly invented instruments. The bleating of sheep and the lowing of cattle became part of daily life as Jabal's advanced herding techniques took hold. This wasn't simply a place where people lived. It was a place where human culture itself was being born. Enoch witnessed this vibrant transformation all around him. He saw his father's vision turning into reality, observed how the city expanded and evolved with each passing day. He learned about leadership by watching Cain organize people and oversee projects. He learned about innovation from seeing his relatives invent new methods and tools. He came to understand the incredible potential of human creativity and perseverance. As Enoch grew from a small child to a boy and then to a young man, he absorbed these lessons deeply. He realized that great things could be achieved when people worked together. He saw that challenges could be met with determination and fresh ideas. He understood that true leadership was about bringing out the best in others and guiding their efforts toward shared objectives. As Enoch matured, it was only natural that he became his father's successor. Cain was aging, and someone needed to step in to lead this flourishing city into the future. Enoch had been prepared for this role from the very beginning of his life. He understood how the city functioned, he knew its people well, and he had learned important lessons from observing his father's leadership. Naturally, the city that carried his name was becoming his responsibility. However, leading this new kind of community required skills unlike anything seen before. Enoch had to learn how to govern not just families or small tribes, but hundreds of people living side by side. He faced decisions about trade, justice, and how to manage the labor that kept the city running smoothly. These were abilities no human leader had ever needed to develop until now. The city also began to attract attention from beyond its borders. People were intrigued by this new way of living. Some traveled there to trade, bringing goods from faraway places in exchange for what the city produced. Others came simply to learn, eager to understand how this urban life operated. Some chose to stay, contributing their talents and knowledge to the city's growing strength. Enoch quickly found himself at the heart of this rising hub of activity. As Cain's successor, he met with traders, welcomed newcomers, and worked to solve the everyday challenges of this unique community. With so many people living in close quarters, he had to develop entirely new skills in diplomacy, negotiation, and leadership. The responsibilities on his shoulders were enormous. Enoch had to ensure that food and water were distributed fairly among the swelling population. He was called upon to settle disputes between neighbors who lived closer together than people ever had before. He had to oversee the efforts of craftsmen, builders, and merchants. He was also faced with decisions about expanding the city's walls to accommodate the growing number of inhabitants. Each day brought fresh challenges that no one in history had yet faced. How do you maintain peace among hundreds living in such close proximity? How do you organize labor so that everyone contributes without anyone being burdened unfairly? How do you assign living spaces, and what happens when conflicts arise over them? Enoch was learning to handle these new and complex social dynamics, but during this same period, another significant development was unfolding in the wider world. While Cain's descendants were constructing cities and advancing technology, another family line was emerging with a completely different focus. Genesis 4:25-26 tells us, Adam knew his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. Seth also had a son, and he named him Enoch. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. After losing Abel, Adam and Eve were given another son, whom they named Seth, meaning appointed or placed, because they saw him as God's provision to replace the son they had lost. Seth's lineage was moving in a very different direction from Cain's. While Cain's descendants were focused on urban development and technological innovation, Seth's descendants were devoted to seeking God. The phrase "began to call on the name of the Lord" carries deep meaning. It suggests that Seth's family was establishing organized worship, perhaps gathering regularly to pray, sing, and seek God's guidance together. They worked to preserve and strengthen their relationship with God, passing down their stories and teachings from one generation to the next. Seth's descendants lived more traditional lives, tending flocks and farming the land, dwelling in tents and simple shelters, moving as the seasons and their animals required. They cared less about invention or progress and focused more on faithfulness and obedience to God. They remembered the ancient stories of creation, the Garden of Eden, the fall, and the tragedy of Cain and Abel. They kept these accounts alive by teaching them to their children. While Enoch's city echoed with the sounds of tools and music, Seth's people gathered quietly in circles for prayer and worship. While Cain's descendants took pride in their innovations and cultural achievements, Seth's people remained humble before God, seeking His will in everything they did. This created a widening gap between the two branches of humanity. On one side stood Cain's line, urban, inventive, culturally advanced, but drifting further away from God. Their focus was on human accomplishments, on building, creating, and advancing civilization. They were proud of their progress, confident in their skills, and less concerned with divine approval. On the other side was Seth's line, traditional, devoted to worship and maintaining their relationship with God, living simpler lives yet holding tightly to their spiritual connection. They prioritized pleasing God over impressing people. They valued faithfulness above achievement, obedience over innovation. The contrast between them was clear. Cain's descendants were building cities with towering walls and guarded gates, creating music and mastering metalwork, but they rarely sought God's guidance or mentioned his name. Seth's descendants lived simply, traveling with their herds, but they gathered regularly to pray and worship, keeping their bond with their Creator alive. The two groups rarely crossed paths. Cain's city lay in the land of Nod, far from where Seth's family chose to settle. The distance wasn't just physical, it was cultural and spiritual as well. Each group was developing its own values, its own priorities, its own understanding of what it meant to be human. Occasionally, stories would travel between them. Those from Seth's line would hear of the impressive city Cain had built, with its fortified walls and new technologies. Those from Cain's line would hear of Seth's descendants and their deep devotion to God, their simple lifestyles, and their regular gatherings for worship. Yet these stories often served to deepen the divide rather than build understanding. Cain's people viewed Seth's descendants as old-fashioned and unsophisticated, too focused on religion and not concerned enough with progress. Seth's people saw Cain's descendants as arrogant and disconnected from God, too obsessed with their own achievements and uninterested in a relationship with their Creator. Enoch found himself caught in the heart of this divide. He was the successor to the world's first great city, leading the most advanced society of his time. Yet he also belonged to a family line marked by violence and separation from God. He carried both the pride of their achievements and the shadow of their guilt. As he looked upon his city, the music, the craftsmanship, the grand buildings, the carefully structured society, he felt a sense of pride in what his family had built. The city bearing his name stood as proof that humanity could create something extraordinary, something intended to endure for generations. But when Enoch heard tales of Seth's descendants and their connection with God, he couldn't help but question what his own family had sacrificed in their pursuit of progress and civilization. Had they gained so much in the material world only to lose their spiritual foundation? Had their focus on human accomplishments caused them to forget the Creator entirely? These questions lingered in Enoch's mind as he stepped fully into his role as leader of the city. He recognized his people's incredible achievements, but he also sensed a void, something missing deep within their lives. Despite all their advancements, there was a hollow space, a spiritual emptiness that no invention or cultural success could fill. Enoch stood at a crossroads, poised for something remarkable to unfold in his life. Though he had been born into privilege and power, raised in the heart of humanity's greatest city, and groomed to lead his people into the future, he also bore the heavy weight of his family's past and the mounting tension between human progress and spiritual connection. The decisions he faced as he embraced his leadership role would shape not just his own destiny, but the future of the city named after him and the legacy of his entire bloodline. This is the story of Enoch, the son of Cain, whose writings would one day be banned by the church. Something unexpected began to happen to Enoch as he assumed more responsibility in his city. Though he was part of Cain's cursed lineage, descended from a family scarred by violence and alienation from God, Enoch felt himself drawn towards something his ancestors had largely neglected: a relationship with the Creator. What began as quiet moments of contemplation soon evolved into something far beyond what anyone could have foreseen. It started in the simplest of ways. While Cain and the other leaders focused on expanding the city's boundaries and advancing their technologies, Enoch found himself wrestling with deeper questions. In the early mornings, he would stand atop the city walls, gazing across the land of Nod, and wonder about the God his grandfather Adam had once known in Eden. He had heard the ancient stories, passed down in whispers and fragmented memories, of a time when humans spoke directly with God. The sharp contrast between those old tales and his family's current way of life troubled him. Though Cain's descendants had achieved great things, Enoch couldn't shake the feeling that something far more important had been lost along the way. They had their music, their metalwork, their remarkable architecture, and their structured society. Yet in gaining all this, they had lost something far more valuable. They had lost their connection to the divine. They had become so absorbed in what they could craft with their own hands that they had forgotten the one who had given them those hands in the first place. Genesis 5:22 reveals something truly remarkable about what unfolded next. Enoch walked with God after he became the father of Methuselah for 300 years and had other sons and daughters. But Enoch's journey with God didn't begin late in life. It started much earlier, in these quiet moments of solitude, when a young leader began searching for something greater than the material achievements of his city. His bond with God was extraordinary precisely because it seemed so unlikely. Here was a man from Cain's cursed lineage, a family marked by murder and separation from God's presence. The mark of Cain's protection still lingered in their bloodline, a constant reminder of the violence that had driven them from their Creator. Yet somehow, against all expectations, God reached out to Cain's great-great-grandson. This connection didn't happen suddenly. Enoch didn't wake up one day to visions or divine voices. It began gradually, with a growing awareness during those early morning moments of reflection that he was not alone. There was a presence beside him, something quiet yet powerful, something that understood the burdens he carried as a leader, the struggles he faced in guiding his people. The first true breakthrough came during a particularly challenging period for the city's leadership. A serious conflict had erupted between various groups of craftsmen, and none of the usual solutions seemed to work. As Enoch struggled to bring peace to his people, he did something his family hadn't done in generations. He prayed. Not to idols, not to the works of human hands, but to the God of his ancestors. And what happened next changed everything. When Enoch asked God for the wisdom to lead with fairness and justice, answers began to come to him in ways he couldn't explain. Complex problems suddenly became clear. He knew how to speak to angry hearts in a way that softened them. His leadership began to reflect a deep, unexpected wisdom that surprised even the elders of the city. People soon noticed there was something different about Enoch. His choices as a leader became consistently wise and just. He seemed to understand the needs of others with a clarity that went beyond normal human insight. When disputes arose, he could uncover solutions that brought peace to everyone involved. When people came to him with their troubles, he always seemed to have the perfect words to offer comfort and guidance. Yet the most astonishing events occurred during his moments of prayer and quiet reflection. Enoch began to experience what could only be described as divine visions. These were not the product of dreams or his imagination. They were sharp, unmistakable insights that revealed things far beyond the borders of his familiar city. Through these visions, he became aware of the spiritual world existing side by side with the one he had always known. The first vision happened while Enoch was praying, asking for direction about his city's destiny. Without warning, his perception expanded beyond the stone walls surrounding him. He found himself looking at the earth from a viewpoint no ordinary human could reach. He witnessed the spiritual powers shaping human events, a hidden realm where angels acted and divine intentions unfolded. It was as though his eyes had been opened to a new level of reality. The world around him remained unchanged, the city streets, its walls, the buildings, and people going about their lives. But now he could also perceive the invisible realm interwoven with the material world. He observed angels moving quietly among people, guiding their thoughts and influencing their choices. He saw the prayers of faithful hearts rising upward like sweet-smelling smoke. He watched unseen battles waged for the souls of men and women. During these first visions, Enoch encountered astonishing beings of light and power, angels who served the Almighty. They were not the dreadful, fearsome creatures people might imagine. To Enoch, they appeared as gentle messengers of peace and wisdom, sent to instruct and help him. At first, these encounters were brief. A glowing figure would appear during his prayers, offering words of hope and guidance for his role as a leader. These beings answered questions that troubled Enoch's heart, teaching him about fairness, compassion, and the delicate balance between human effort and obedience to divine will. The first angel who approached him introduced himself as a messenger sent by the Most High. He explained that Enoch had been chosen for a unique purpose, though its fullness would unfold over time. This angel, named Uriel, became Enoch's chief mentor and companion at the start of his journey. Uriel taught Enoch about the true nature of prayer and how to recognize the difference between his own thoughts and God's messages. He showed him how to calm his mind and heart so he could hear the divine voice more clearly. These early teachings were essential because they prepared Enoch for far greater revelations yet to come. As Enoch's spiritual awareness grew, his visions expanded too. The angels began leading him on journeys that surpassed all human reason. Though his body remained within his chamber or upon the city walls, his spirit traveled to realms no mortal had witnessed. The first of these journeys filled Enoch with wonder and fear. He felt himself lifted from his earthly place and carried through the skies at incredible speed. Beneath him, the earth appeared like a vast map, revealing lands and people he had never imagined. He could clearly see the mighty rivers flowing across the land, the mountain chains dividing nations, and the immense oceans embracing the continents. These journeys through the spiritual realms were beyond anything words could truly express. In ways difficult to explain, Enoch moved through dimensions far removed from the physical world. He beheld the throne of the Almighty, witnessed multitudes of angels in worship, and observed the cosmic harmony that sustained creation. On one especially striking journey, Enoch was brought to what seemed to be the very border of existence itself. He saw the earth's foundations, the pillars holding up the sky, and the heavenly storehouses where snow and hail were kept. He watched the courses of the sun and the moon and began to grasp, for the first time, the incredible precision behind the Creator's design of the universe. The angel Uriel explained how God had set laws in place, laws that governed not only human actions, but also every part of creation. The sun rose and set exactly as appointed. The moon followed its cycles without fail. The stars moved in their patterns by divine instruction. Seasons came and went at the right time, and rain fell exactly as needed. In another of these spiritual journeys, Enoch was shown the tree of life, which had once stood in the Garden of Eden. He saw its breathtaking beauty and came to understand its purpose as the source of everlasting life. The angels explained how humanity's rebellion had cut them off from this tree, but also hinted at God's plan to one day restore it for those who lived faithfully. The tree was grand beyond anything Enoch had imagined. Its trunk stood tall and strong, its branches spread wide, and its leaves never faded. The fruit hanging from its limbs glowed with a soft inner light, and Enoch could feel the life-giving energy it held. He came to realize this tree symbolized more than endless life. It represented a deep, unbroken relationship with the Creator. Yet perhaps the most profound revelations came when Enoch was shown the Watchers, These were a unique group of angels given special roles on earth. The book that would later carry Enoch's name described these beings in detail, and through his visions, Enoch understood how important their duties were in the unseen realm. The Watchers had been tasked to oversee and guide humanity. They had been granted knowledge of creation's mysteries, including the movements of the heavens, the properties of plants and minerals, and the arts of healing and construction. Their purpose was to help humanity grow and progress while remaining faithful to their Maker. At first, the Watchers had fulfilled these roles with devotion. They taught people practical skills such as farming, caring for animals, and crafting useful tools. They had once guided humanity in ways that honored God and helped people thrive. Acting as a connection between heaven and earth, they taught humans how to understand their role within God's creation. Yet, something went terribly wrong among some of these Watchers. Through his visions, Enoch saw how certain angels began desiring things that were forbidden to them. They looked upon human women and found them attractive. A craving for physical pleasures took root in their hearts, even though such desires were not meant for beings like them. Genesis 6:2 touches on this when it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives. But Enoch's visions revealed the complete truth behind this event. These fallen Watchers were not only marrying human women, they were also revealing forbidden knowledge to humanity. This knowledge wasn't evil by nature, but it was shared at the wrong time and in harmful ways. The Watchers taught people about crafting weapons, practicing magic, and using adornments like cosmetics and jewelry that encouraged vanity and pride. They provided humanity with skills they weren't ready to handle wisely. Enoch saw how it all began with just a few Watchers who chose to defy their heavenly instructions. Under the leadership of one called Semjaza, they made a pact to descend to earth and take human wives. They persuaded one another that if all of them rebelled together, none could be punished alone. 200 Watchers joined this act of defiance, each one choosing a woman to marry. But their wrongdoing didn't end with these unlawful unions. They started competing to see who could give the most extraordinary secrets to humanity. Azazel taught people how to forge swords, knives, shields, and armor. He showed them how to work metals to produce weapons far more dangerous than anything known before. Barakel instructed people in astrology, using the stars for misguided purposes. Kokabel revealed how to craft signs and predict omens. Chazakiel taught how to read clouds and forecast weather, but for selfish reasons. Enoch witnessed in his visions how this forbidden knowledge spread across the world. He saw how it led to corruption, affecting not only individuals but entire societies. People used their newfound knowledge for selfish and destructive purposes. They built weapons to harm others, practiced sorcery to deceive and control, and became obsessed with beauty and material possessions. The skills of working with metal, which could have been used to make farming tools or help build homes, were instead mostly used to create weapons. The knowledge of the stars, which should have led people to admire the wonders of God's creation, was twisted into astrology and fortune-telling. The arts of making cosmetics and jewelry, which might have been innocent ways to express beauty, became sources of vanity and pride, creating divisions between people and forming social classes. The children born from the union of the Watchers and human women were known as the Nephilim. These giants had both human and angelic traits. They grew to immense size and strength, but they also carried the same corrupt desires as their fathers. They became violent, using their power to dominate and spread fear among ordinary people. The Nephilim weren't only physically strong, they were also highly intelligent because of the knowledge passed down from their angelic fathers. This made them even more dangerous as they combined extraordinary strength with advanced understanding of warfare, deception, and domination. They made themselves rulers over human societies, forcing people to give them tribute and even worship them. Enoch was shown again and again how this corruption was spreading across the earth like a plague. Even the descendants of Seth, who had once remained close to God, were now falling under the influence of this forbidden knowledge. Even some of Cain's descendants, although already distant from God, were now becoming even more corrupt than before. Enoch saw scenes of violence and evil that broke his heart. He watched humanity turn on each other, shedding blood with the new weapons they had made. He saw people being led astray by sorcery, turning from truth to lies. He noticed how people's obsession with appearance and wealth ruined the simple, joyful relationships they once had. But the most terrifying vision came when Enoch was shown how God would respond to this growing corruption. The Creator, who had made humanity with such care and hope, was deeply saddened by what mankind had become. The evil on earth had grown so great that God's judgment could no longer be postponed. Genesis 6:5-7 expresses this sorrow clearly. And God saw that human wickedness had become immense on the earth, and that every thought in their hearts was always evil. And the Lord regretted that he had made mankind on earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord declared, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth. Enoch saw the flood coming long before it happened. He saw the dark clouds gathering, the deep waters bursting forth, and the flood rising to cover the world. He witnessed how only one family would survive, Noah and his household, because they had stayed true to God despite the evil around them. The visions Enoch received about the coming judgment were frightening, but he knew they served an important purpose. He realized that God's decision to cleanse the earth was not driven by anger, but by love, a love rooted in the hope of what humanity could still become if freed from the corruption destroying it. The flood would erase the Nephilim, break the influence of the fallen watchers, and allow humanity to begin again. Yet Enoch's role wasn't simply to witness these events in silence. In one of his most profound encounters with the angels, he received a divine mission that would completely alter the course of his life. The angels revealed to him that he had been chosen to be a scribe, a recorder of sacred revelations and divine prophecies. This responsibility came with clear instructions. Enoch was to document all that he had witnessed and heard during his journeys through the heavens. He was tasked with writing down the names and deeds of the fallen watchers, detailing the corruption they had spread across the earth, and recording the judgment that was to come. But beyond that, he was also to share the message of hope that would follow the judgment, God's plan to redeem and restore what had been lost. It was a monumental task. How could ordinary human words possibly express the wonders of the heavenly realms? How could he capture the majesty of God's throne or the songs of countless angels? How could he describe the cosmic laws that held creation together? But the angels gave Enoch supernatural help. They taught him not only what to write, but how to write it. They revealed symbols and languages capable of conveying deep spiritual truths. They granted him knowledge far beyond anything he had learned in the city of Cain. Even the writing itself became a miracle. As Enoch sat down with his tools, the words flowed through him as if guided by a higher power. He wrote about things he had never been taught, described places his eyes had never seen, and explained spiritual mysteries beyond the limits of normal human understanding. Through his work as a divine scribe, Enoch came to understand that his mission had significance far beyond his own lifetime. He was not writing these things solely for his generation, but for people who would live long after him. The angels explained that his writings would be preserved to guide future generations. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary part of Enoch's commission was his role as a bridge between angels and humanity. Because God had chosen him to walk closely with him, despite his origins in Cain's cursed line, Enoch had a rare insight into both divine purity and human weakness. This made him the ideal messenger between heaven and earth. The fallen watchers who had brought ruin upon themselves and humankind longed to reach God in their hopeless state. But their rebellion had cut them off from the divine presence, leaving them unable to approach God's throne on their own. In their desperation, they turned to Enoch, begging him to intercede for them. According to the book of Enoch, these fallen angels pleaded with him to write a petition to God on their behalf, asking for forgiveness and a chance to be restored. They admitted their wrongdoing in leading humanity astray and causing judgment to fall upon the earth. They hoped that through someone who still had access to God's presence, there might be a chance for mercy. Enoch agreed to deliver their plea, not because he condoned their actions, but because he recognized the value of mercy and the hope for redemption. Carrying their written request, Enoch presented it during one of his visits to the heavens. The answer he received was clear and final. God confirmed the watchers' guilt and the necessity of their punishment. The damage they had inflicted upon the earth was too severe to be ignored, and their punishment was fully justified. However, God also revealed a greater plan for redemption, not for the fallen watchers themselves, but for the people they had influenced. This taught Enoch deep truths about justice and mercy, about how choices lead to consequences, and how redemption can still bring hope. He came to understand that while God's forgiveness is available to those who sincerely turn from their wrongdoing, certain consequences must still run their course. The watchers would receive their sentence, but humanity would eventually be given a chance to be restored. As Enoch continued his role as a messenger and recorder, something remarkable began to take shape. The angels began to speak of something unheard of in human history. They hinted at a unique future awaiting Enoch, one that would make him unlike anyone who had ever walked the earth. The promise they unveiled seemed almost beyond belief. Enoch would not face death as other people did. Instead, he would be taken directly from life on earth into the heavenly realm. His physical form would be changed, and he would be brought to live with God forever. This promise of being taken up was not given as a prize for Enoch's deeds, but as a sign of God's power and kindness. It showed that the Creator could break even the curse of death that had entered the world through Adam's disobedience. It was a glimpse of the eternal life God wished to offer to all his people. The angels explained that Enoch's departure would serve more than one purpose. It would show his generation that God still longed for a close bond with humanity. It would also keep Enoch safe so he could continue his role as messenger and recorder in the heavenly realm. Furthermore, it would offer hope to future generations that death was not the final end for human beings. As the time for his transformation grew near, Enoch remained faithful in his work of writing down divine messages and acting as a link between heaven and earth. He understood that his service on earth was preparing him for an even greater purpose in heaven that would last forever. The last part of Enoch's spiritual journey on earth was filled with deeper and more powerful encounters with God's presence. His visions came more often and with greater detail. The angels began revealing to him not only what was happening in his own time, but also prophecies about the future, stretching far beyond his own generation. He witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, saw people come to understand God, and observed moments that would shape humanity for generations. In this time, Enoch's role grew beyond being a mediator for the fallen angels. He became an intercessor for all mankind, bringing their prayers and hopes before God's throne. Those who lived righteously during his lifetime sought him out, asking him to pray for them and their loved ones. They understood that Enoch shared a unique closeness with God that none of them had. Stories about Enoch's remarkable spiritual gifts spread well beyond his homeland. People traveled from faraway places just to speak with him and seek his advice. They came with their most profound questions about God, righteousness, and the mysteries of life and death. Enoch consistently guided them back to the central truth he had learned through his journeys beyond the earth. God longed for connection with humanity, and this bond could be achieved through faith and obedience. Finishing his written revelations became Enoch's greatest purpose in his final years on earth. The book carrying his name was more than a record of visions. It served as a detailed guide for understanding the spiritual world and humanity's role in it. It described heavenly orders, explained cosmic principles, foretold future events, and offered wisdom for living rightly in a world full of corruption. His writings were unlike anything known before. They gave answers to questions that had troubled people since creation itself. How was the cosmos structured? What kinds of angels existed, and what were their duties? In what ways did unseen forces shape earthly matters? What was God's ultimate intention for humanity? Enoch's book provided answers to these and many other mysteries, just as Genesis 5:24 puts it. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more. For God took him, though this short scripture barely hints at the enormity of what had unfolded in Enoch's life. From his beginnings in a family marked by shame, he rose to become the most spiritually awakened person to ever walk the earth. His transformation from a man of this world to a heavenly recorder showed how divine mercy could surpass human weakness. The book Enoch wrote during his astonishing spiritual journey was something entirely new to humanity. Never had anyone tried to document such vivid visions of the heavens, such detailed knowledge about angels and the workings of the universe, or such specific predictions about the end of days. Enoch's work became the earliest form of apocalyptic writing, a genre that would shape religious thinking for countless generations ahead. Enoch approached his writing with the same dedication he once showed when guiding his people. He carefully recorded each vision with accuracy, noted every encounter with angels attentively, and preserved every prophecy exactly as it had been given to him. He knew his words were not meant just for his own time, but for generations far into the future. The act of writing was unlike anything any person had experienced before. When Enoch sat down with his materials, it felt as though the words flowed through him with divine direction. He wrote about places his natural eyes had never seen, explained ideas beyond normal human thought, and recorded names and events revealed during his journeys to the heavens. What resulted from this divine guidance was a vast and detailed work. It contained more than just Enoch's personal stories. It offered clear insights into how the spiritual and physical worlds were connected. He described the different orders of angels and the specific tasks each was given within God's creation. He also detailed the rebellion of the Watchers and explained how their forbidden teachings had led humanity astray. He warned of the coming judgment, but also spoke of the hope for future redemption. What made Enoch's writings so groundbreaking was the depth and breadth they covered. Earlier, sacred texts had been simpler, focusing on God's dealings with individuals, basic moral laws, and songs of praise. Enoch's work was something entirely new. It presented a full picture of the universe's structure and how spiritual powers affected the physical world. The content of Enoch's book was both captivating and unsettling. He wrote in detail about the fallen angels, naming particular watchers and listing the forbidden knowledge each had shared with humankind. Azazel, for instance, taught people how to create weapons. Barakel led them into the errors of astrology. Kokobel revealed how to craft false signs and omens. The names and offenses continued, building a full account of how these angels' rebellion brought about human downfall. Yet perhaps the most startling part of Enoch's writings was his account of the Nephilim. These beings, born from the unions of fallen angels and human women, were described as ruthless giants who brought suffering to ordinary people. Enoch depicted their immense size, unnatural strength, and endless hunger for violence and destruction. He described how these beings had taken positions of power over human societies, demanding both reverence and offerings. The book also contained many prophecies concerning the end of days. Enoch had been shown visions of a great judgment that would come upon the earth, clearing away the corruption that had tainted mankind. He gave a vivid account of the flood, explaining how it would act as both punishment for evil and a cleansing that would allow for a new start. He wrote about the survival of a single righteous family who would rebuild human life once the waters had disappeared. Beyond the flood's immediate consequences, Enoch's writings included prophecies reaching far into the future. He spoke of empires that would rise and fall, of people who would come to recognize God, and of an eventual restoration when righteousness would rule upon the earth. These visions offered hope beyond destruction, showing that God's plan was not only about judgment, but also about ultimate redemption. As Enoch's writings spread among the people of his time, they caused a great stir. Nothing like this had been written before. People were astonished by the detailed portrayals of heavenly worlds, intrigued by the descriptions of angelic hierarchies, and deeply moved by the warnings of future judgment. The book addressed questions that had troubled humanity since the dawn of time. The early Jewish community warmly welcomed Enoch's writings. Here was a book that explained in detail things they had only heard briefly mentioned in other texts. The short passage in Genesis about the sons of God taking human wives was expanded into a thorough narrative of angelic rebellion. The mysterious reference to giants on the earth was clarified through in-depth descriptions of the Nephilim. Jewish scholars and teachers began to study Enoch's book closely, discovering answers to many of the faith's most perplexing questions. The writings helped them grasp why evil seemed so widespread, how invisible forces shaped human events, and what God's ultimate intentions were for mankind. It became a cherished text, copied and preserved with great devotion. The Book of Enoch was especially important to Jewish communities during times of hardship and oppression. When they faced foreign rulers or wrestled with the problem of why the innocent suffered while the wicked thrived, Enoch's words offered them guidance. It revealed that behind earthly struggles lay a spiritual reality, that God was fully aware of humanity's pain, and that true justice would ultimately be fulfilled. For many centuries, the Book of Enoch was highly respected within Jewish religious tradition. It was quoted by teachers, studied by scholars, and valued by everyday believers. Although it was never officially added to the Hebrew Scriptures, it was widely accepted as a genuine revelation from God. Many believed it was essential for anyone seeking to understand the unseen spiritual world. When Christianity began to grow from its Jewish foundation, the first followers naturally adopted the Jewish reverence for Enoch's writings. Writers of the New Testament clearly knew its contents, with some directly or indirectly referencing its ideas. The impact of Enoch's writings can be traced throughout the earliest Christian texts. The most obvious reference comes from the letter of Jude, verses 14 to 15, which says, "And Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying," This passage quotes Enoch's book directly, recognizing it as true prophecy. Jude also mentions the story of Michael the archangel disputing with the devil over Moses' body, a tale linked to traditions found within Enoch's writings. The letter of 2 Peter contains similar teachings about fallen angels kept in chains awaiting judgment, ideas that are thoroughly explored in the Book of Enoch. Beyond these clear references, Enoch's influence can be found throughout the New Testament. The detailed teachings about angels found in Paul's letters, the themes of cosmic battles in Revelation, and even Jesus' own mentions of the Son of Man all reflect knowledge of ideas fully developed in Enoch's writings. Early Christian leaders and writers continued this tradition of honoring the Book of Enoch. Church figures such as Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Clement of Alexandria regarded it as valuable spiritual literature. They quoted it in their sermons, referenced its insights into spiritual mysteries, and encouraged their followers to read it as a way to understand complex theological matters. The Book of Enoch was especially cherished by early Christians who sought to comprehend the cosmic scale of their faith. It offered clarity on why there was a spiritual battle between good and evil, how Christ's triumph connected to angelic conflicts, and what the future held for both humanity and the spiritual world. Many early Christian communities kept the book alongside their other sacred texts. In the first centuries of the Church, Enoch's writings were widely accepted and respected. They were copied into several languages, examined by scholars, and quoted by teachers. For many believers, the book was seen as key to grasping the broader picture of God's purpose for creation. Its detailed revelations seem to offer essential background for understanding both the Old and New Testaments. However, as Christianity grew more structured and institutionalized, debates arose about which books should be considered official scripture. Church authorities began establishing formal guidelines to decide which writings deserved a place in the biblical canon and which should be viewed as secondary works. It was during this period that Enoch's book came under closer examination. The earliest doubts about Enoch's work were not centered on its teachings, but on questions about who had truly written it. Some early church leaders started to doubt whether the book had truly been written by the biblical Enoch, the one said to have been taken up into heaven. They noticed that the book included very specific prophecies about events that had happened long after Enoch's lifetime, which made them think it was probably written much later by someone else. These doubts about who wrote the book raised bigger questions about whether it could really be seen as having divine authority. If Enoch himself had not written the book, why should people treat it as inspired scripture? Church leaders began to draw a clear line between books that were clearly written by recognized biblical figures and those that seemed to be later works given ancient names. There were also concerns about some of the book's actual content. Although the main ideas of fallen angels and God's judgment were widely accepted, certain details made some church leaders uncomfortable. Descriptions of angels mixing with humans, the strong focus on forbidden knowledge, and the detailed listings of angels felt to some leaders like pointless guessing or even dangerous teachings. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire and came into contact with Greek philosophy, some leaders leaned more toward logical and less myth-based ideas about God. The book's dramatic storytelling, with its vivid tales of heavenly trips and angelic meetings, struck some as too basic or unrefined for educated Christian audiences. The move away from accepting Enoch's book happened gradually, not suddenly. Different leaders had different views, and some communities still valued the book while others did not. Over time, though, the common view became that it was interesting but not authoritative, worth reading but not worthy of being included as scripture. The mainstream church's formal rejection of the Book of Enoch did not happen all at once, but took place over time through various councils and official decisions. Prominent church figures like Jerome and Augustine, who played key roles in defining Christian beliefs, voiced doubts about accepting the book as part of the Bible. They claimed its true author was uncertain and its contents were not vital for understanding or practicing the Christian faith. In 364 AD, the Council of Laodicea released one of the earliest recognized lists of biblical texts, and the Book of Enoch was left out. Later, church councils followed this example, and over time, the book was formally removed from the accepted Christian scriptures in most regions. By the 5th century, the Book of Enoch was generally seen as apocryphal by the majority of Christian groups. Along with its rejection, there were also efforts to limit the book's distribution. Church leaders gave orders to stop making or sharing copies, and in many cases, existing manuscripts were destroyed. Their goal was to keep believers from becoming confused or being led astray by a text that was no longer considered trustworthy scripture. The Church had multiple reasons for its actions against Enoch's writings. Officially, leaders pointed to doubts about who had written it, concerns about its place in the canon, and fears that it might confuse people about core beliefs. They argued that the book dealt with speculative ideas that were unnecessary for Christian teaching and might encourage misguided thinking. Still, there may have been additional reasons behind this decision. The Book of Enoch strongly criticized corrupt religious figures and warned against moral failures among leaders. Some experts believe this may have made church authorities uncomfortable. The book's focus on receiving divine messages outside the established church could also have felt threatening to leaders working to strengthen their own authority. Another factor may have been a desire to clearly separate Christianity from Judaism. As the church tried to build its identity as a new faith, distancing itself from Jewish texts like Enoch's may have seemed necessary. Refusing to recognize Enoch's book was a clear way for Christianity to show it had its own unique sacred texts. This effort to keep Enoch's book out of Christian teaching worked well across much of the Christian world. For more than 1,000 years, the book nearly vanished from churches and communities in Europe and the Mediterranean. Sometimes scholars mentioned it in their writings, but actual copies became almost impossible to find. Most Christians no longer even remembered that such a book had existed. Still, the story of Enoch's book did not end when the larger church rejected it. In one small part of the Christian world, people continued to value and protect the book. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church refused to accept the decision to remove Enoch's book from the Bible. They continued to believe it was real scripture and kept it within their collection of holy books. Early Christian missionaries had brought the Book of Enoch to Ethiopia, where it was translated into Ge'ez, the local language. While other churches were trying to erase the book, the Ethiopian church defended its worth and kept studying and copying it. They taught from it and treated it as a genuine part of the Bible. For more than 1,000 years, the Ethiopian church was almost the only Christian group that had complete copies of Enoch's book. Although small pieces and references survived in other regions, only the Ethiopians kept the entire work safe in their religious libraries and monasteries. They continued to read it, include it in worship, and treat it as an important religious book. Interest in Enoch's book returned in the 18th century when Europeans visiting Ethiopia found copies in monasteries there. A Scottish explorer, James Bruce, brought copies back to Europe after his trip to Ethiopia in the 1770s. This event started a fresh wave of scholarly attention toward the long-forgotten text. When European researchers began examining the Ethiopian manuscripts, they were amazed by what they discovered. They had finally found the source of many old quotes and references they knew from early Christian writings, but had never been able to locate. The book helped fill in gaps about ancient Jewish and Christian ideas that had remained unclear for centuries. The discovery of more ancient manuscripts in the 20th century, especially among the Dead Sea Scrolls, proved that the Ethiopian church had truly preserved a genuine ancient work. Pieces of Enoch's book found at Qumran revealed that Jewish groups during the time of Jesus knew and respected this text, just as the Ethiopian tradition had always claimed. Nowadays, the Book of Enoch is widely available and studied by scholars worldwide. Although most Christian churches still do not consider it official scripture, It is accepted as a significant historical document that helps us understand early Jewish and Christian beliefs. The history of its rejection and survival reminds us how political and religious powers often shape which sacred texts are remembered and which disappear. The modern rediscovery of Enoch's book has opened entirely new paths for biblical and historical research. Thanks to this rediscovery, scholars have been able to follow how Jewish and Christian ideas developed in ways that were once impossible. The book offers essential background for understanding ancient views about angels, demons, life after death, and battles between good and evil. Modern researchers have also gained a new appreciation for the literary quality of Enoch's work in ways earlier generations did not recognize. Its complicated storyline, detailed descriptions of the universe, and rich prophecies reveal a high level of literary talent that was ahead of its time. The book introduced literary styles later seen in other apocalyptic writings throughout Jewish and Christian history. As experts have continued to study its content, the influence of Enoch's book on later religious texts has become more obvious. Many themes and images found in later Jewish and Christian writings can be traced back to ideas first fully explored in Enoch's book. The elaborate teachings on angels in medieval Christianity, the cosmic battles in apocalyptic stories, and even parts of Islamic traditions about fallen angels all show signs of Enoch's influence. One of the most remarkable findings has been how deeply New Testament writers drew from Enochic traditions. Beyond the clear reference in the Book of Jude, scholars have noticed many subtle allusions and shared themes throughout the New Testament. The way Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, Paul's mentions of spiritual powers, and the cosmic visions in Revelation all show an awareness of ideas found in detail within Enoch's writings. Recovering Enoch's book has also brought new understanding of the variety within early Christianity. It has become obvious that the first Christian communities were far more diverse in belief and practice than later church traditions have often suggested. Different Christian groups relied on different sacred books, emphasized different teachings, and approached their faith in distinct ways. The rejection of Enoch's book was part of a larger effort through which one specific form of Christianity rose to dominance while other branches were pushed aside. This historical viewpoint has sparked important discussions about how religious authority is shaped and how decisions about sacred texts are made. The story of Enoch's book shows how human institutions, influenced by politics and cultural attitudes, help determine which religious writings are remembered and which are left behind. The fact that a text once treasured by early Jewish and Christian communities could nearly vanish for more than 1,000 years highlights how fragile the transmission of texts can be and how vital it is to have multiple efforts to preserve them. The Ethiopian Church's dedication to protecting Enoch's book has also drawn attention to the key role that smaller, often overlooked, religious groups can play in safeguarding ancient traditions. While the dominant church was working to erase the book, Ethiopian Christians remained loyal to it, treating it as genuine scripture. Because of their commitment to this ancient work, its modern rediscovery became possible, along with the new scholarly understandings that followed. Today's easy access to Enoch's book has also led to fresh interest in its spiritual and theological ideas. Many modern readers are captivated by its vivid portrayals of spiritual worlds, its accounts of cosmic struggles, and its prophecies about what is to come. Although most major Christian churches still reject it as part of the official Bible, many individuals see value in it for deepening their grasp of biblical themes and enhancing their own spiritual views. However, this renewed attention has also stirred some of the same concerns that caused the book's initial rejection. Some religious leaders fear that people may become confused about how it relates to the official scriptures, or that they might grow too fixated on speculative teachings about angels and cosmic secrets. These worries reflect the debates from the early church over how apocalyptic writings should fit into Christian belief and practice. Scholarly research on Enoch's book has also shown how complex its writing and preservation have been. Experts have discovered that the version we have today is really a combination of several distinct texts written at different times and later merged into one volume. This complicated history helps explain why readers notice shifts in style and content, and it reveals more about how ancient religious texts were written, collected, and passed down through time. Ongoing archaeological work has continued to provide new insights into the world in which the Book of Enoch was valued. The fragments found with the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that multiple copies of Enochic writings were kept at Qumran, showing that these texts were held in high regard by the Jewish community that lived there. Other manuscript discoveries have helped researchers trace how the Book of Enoch was passed down and translated as it moved through different religious groups. The story of this book stands as a powerful reminder of how sacred texts can endure despite overwhelming challenges. Even though the most influential religious institution of its era tried to suppress it, the book survived thanks to the commitment of a small, often overlooked community. This act of preservation eventually led to the book's modern rediscovery and recognition as one of the most significant works of ancient religious literature. The path Enoch's book took, from wide acceptance to official rejection and finally to renewed interest, highlights how religious authority and decisions about sacred texts can change over time. What one generation sees as vital scripture may be dismissed by another as questionable or even dangerous. The standards used to define religious authority are also shaped by historical events and institutional decisions. Modern conversations about the Book of Enoch still reflect these ongoing tensions between the power of religious institutions and the personal search for spiritual meaning. Some people view the rediscovery of the book as a valuable chance to reclaim forgotten spiritual insights and to broaden our understanding of ancient faith traditions. Others see it as a potential distraction from core religious beliefs, or as something that might cause confusion about theology. For the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never set the book aside, this renewed respect has confirmed the wisdom of their ancient choice. Leaders of the Ethiopian Church often point to their careful preservation of this old text as proof of their deep connection to the earliest Christian traditions. They still consider the book part of their sacred scriptures and continue to use it in both their worship and teaching. The extraordinary path of Enoch's book, from an ancient divine message to being banned and finally to being found again, shows how religious writings make their way through history in complicated ways. Political influence, decisions by religious leaders, cultural shifts, and personal actions all help shape which old texts endure and which are lost. The survival of this book, despite attempts to erase it, reflects both the devotion of those who protected it and the lasting impact of its message, which has continued to inspire readers across generations and cultures. If you liked learning about this biblical mystery, be sure to subscribe for more untold stories from ancient history, and share this video with anyone who enjoys uncovering the real truth behind the stories we thought we already knew. What surprised you the most about the story of Enoch? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll uncover another amazing biblical secret that has been hiding in plain sight.